Hi everyone, my name is Daniela de Paulis. I am a media artist, a former contemporary dancer, a radio operator and a radio telescope operator. Thank you so much for having me in this festival. I am truly honored to be part of CYFEST13, and I really wish I could have been in St. Petersburg in person to give this talk. And in a way, it is my pleasure today to guide you through my artistic research through radio, which is the work I'm presenting at CYFEST. And I will discuss some of my projects starting from 2001, which is when I started working with radio technologies in my artistic practice. The image you see is the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia. I was there in 2019, and I should be going back in 2022 thanks to a fellowship to develop an art project, a new art project with radio technologies. Today, however, I'm going to talk about my project that is presented both at the festival and also in the special issue of Leonardo, Chaos, Cosmos and Chaos, where there is also my paper, The Metamorphosis of a Periplaneta Americana, and I have my issue here, and I will also talk about the project I presented in the paper. As I mentioned, I'm a radio operator and a radio telescope operator at the Dwingeloo radio telescope, which is in the north of the Netherlands, which is where I am based. And over the years, working with the radio technologies as an artist, I also learned a lot about the technical aspects of this material that I use for my work, which is radio waves. And radio waves are immaterial, but are part of the electromagnetic spectrum, so are actually physical waves. So they're very much a physical thing. The first project I developed with these technologies is using the technology called moonbounce. Moonbounce was developed after the Second World War by the US Navy and consists in sending and receiving radio signals using the moon as a natural satellite. So the moon is used as a reflector. And this technology was used mostly during the Cold War to receive signals from the Eastern countries, including, of course, the former Soviet Union, and was somehow abandoned by the US Navy in the 50s when artificial satellites were invented and deployed. It is used only by radio amateurs. Nowadays, it has no military use anymore. It is used for playful experiments in amateur radio. And it has traditionally used for Morse code transmissions and also voice transmissions. So you will see moonbounce conventionally used with these two forms of communications. As a visual artist, mainly as a visual artist, I work also with other media, but my interest is in performance and also video, especially. And as a visual artist, I was interested in making this journey to the moon and back visible. So I started questioning if we could visualize this journey via moonbounce. So my question was, can we use this moonbounce technology with visual data, for example, images? So it was a way to symbolically use radio waves as light waves, which are also part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And I contacted the team of radio operators who are based at the Dwingeloo radio telescope, and I proposed a collaboration where we would be sending and receiving images using the moon as a natural reflector as part of a live performance, which also involves the audience. And this proposal was welcomed with great enthusiasm for several reasons. First, because it was the very first artistic project they ever hosted there, and also because in amateur radio, there has never been a successful attempt to moon bounce images. So this was a very challenging, very exciting also experiment for the radio amateurs to overtake. So in 2009, we started working together, and we finally, a few months after, we managed to reflect off the surface of the moon the first images. And here you see the image of the title of the performance, OPTICKS, which is the work in which I applied this technology most of the times. So once we succeeded, I call this technology visual moon bounce, which it is essentially what it is, what it says. It's using the moon bounce technology visually, so with images. And you see that the images that are reflected by the surface of the moon are very much distorted. The data are lost, and this is because of several reasons. First of all, because the distance between the Earth and the moon and back is about 800,000 kilometers. So it's a very long distance, and the radio waves traveling such a long distance become weaker. When they return back to Earth, they're very weak. And also, once they are hitting the surface of the moon, they are scattered in all directions. The moon is not a very good reflector. It is a sphere. It is full of craters. So once the radio waves hit the surface, they are reflected and refracted in all directions in the cosmos. And only a very small percentage of these radio waves return back to Earth and is received by one of the collaborating antennas. And so there are other reasons why there is this distortion, including the Doppler shift, what they call lunar libration. So I'm not an astronomer, but there are also several astronomical reasons why there is so much data loss in moon bounce. And I think I really like that these images really capture the journey that these radio waves take between the Earth and the moon and back. And I think this is really what the participants in my performance also really appreciate, that they are able to see. They have a very tangible proof that these radio waves have traveled such a great distance, and along the way they also absorb other radio waves from other human and non-human activities that are happening at the time of transmission and reception. Here you see just a few images that we have been using over the years. And thanks to Astronomers Without Borders, this project has become a global project. So it has been presented for 10 years as part of Global Astronomy Month. And thanks to this platform, OPTICKS has really become a worldwide performance, which is streamed on the web. And it is usually presented as a sort of a gathering of artists and scientists. And the topic of our conversation is the moon, the cosmos. And while we talk about these topics, images that are submitted by the audience are sent to the moon and back in real time. And this really, this form of happening, I think makes this journey really exciting. And usually at the end of the performance, I also send these moon reflected images to the people who originally submitted them as postcards. So they receive a postcard with the tangible and permanent proof of their journey to the moon and back. Whenever I present this technology, I also talk about, I think, the image, which is for me really the symbol of this visual moon bounce technology. And it is the same image that is on the surface of the moon. This image, in fact, has been brought to the moon by astronaut Charles Duke in 1972. And it has been sitting on the surface of the moon since then. And most likely by now it is completely bleached out because of the radiation of the sun. So in 2015, when thanks to the network of Astronomers Without Borders, I reached out to Charles Duke, and he kindly sent me a scanned copy of this photo, which we sent to the moon and back. And you see on the right-hand side the result, which is very pixelated. And when I sent him the result as a postcard, he said, Daniela, thank you so much. I think it's amazing you can do that. And this is really the response that I normally receive from people from around the world. I often get a thank you note because people really experience in a almost very concrete way this journey to the moon. So overall, this project has been really exciting for me to present as a performance, and for several reasons, because of the worldwide audience participation. We have been reflecting off the surface of the moon images from really different cultures, and it is always wonderful to see all these different cultural notes in those photos. And also because it really allowed me to create a worldwide networks of radio antennas, and also of participants who reach out to me because they want to be part of the project, maybe present a poem, or just talk about the moon from their expertise. At the same time, I also, while working with this technology, I started really delving into the cultural aspects of radio technologies, and also images created with these technologies. And in particular, the images that are relayed back by space probes that are exploring the cosmos. So this image was particularly iconic for me when I first saw it in 2013. It really opened up my mind and made me think about how realistic these photos are becoming. So this was one of the earliest images, in my opinion, where you start really seeing the texture of the surface of Mars, and you can really start imagining touching the sand of the Martian surface. You can almost smell the powder of the Martian surface, and you can imagine really to embody these environments. However, this type of journey is only through our imagination, through our mind. For probably still a few more generations, we might not be able to experience firsthand these kind of landscapes. We can only imagine to be there. And therefore, these images really allow us to travel into space with our mind. And at the same time, they are producing a new type of knowledge, which is completely disembodied. We cannot experience these landscapes. We can only imagine what they're like based on our memories of landscapes on Earth. And so I somehow started thinking of this knowledge as a form of dualistic knowledge. So it's as if these images of cosmology nowadays are producing a knowledge which is somehow dualistic, where the mind and the body have different experiences. Another thing that is really captivating about this photo is the fact that this portrayed the very first action, human action on the soil of Mars. So this is the photo of the very first hole drilled on the surface of Mars, which is really, which is actually very telling about the extension of our actions also into outer space. We see now that our craft and our science is really impacting the nature, the environment of another world. And I think this is actually really quite a powerful message. Nowadays, images of Mars rovers are even more engaging. They're really playing on this idea of embodiment. We see, for example, the Perseverance rover now takes 360-degree photographs of the surface of Mars, and it almost the kind of the viewpoint is really as if, as viewers, we are invited to jump on the rover, take a seat on the rover, and explore with the rover the surface of Mars. So there is really this invite to embody the rover, to transport ourselves onto these landscapes. And I think NASA is really using this view of cinematic view of large landscapes, this panoramic view, which we see also in, for example, Hollywood cinema, or it's really, these images are becoming increasingly sophisticated from the perspective of visual language. And I actually wrote a paper about these, the topic of embodiment and physicality of these images, together with the philosopher Chelsea Haramia, and this chapter will be published next year. But we really have been exploring in quite a great depth the language, the visual language of these images, and also how they communicate physicality, and how this physicality in outer space also reflects back to our society on Earth. And also, a few years ago, there was an article in The Guardian by a curator, Jonathan Jones, who share apparently the same fascination for these images in terms of visual language. And he claims that these images produced, in this case by the Hubble Space Telescope, which is an optical telescope, are becoming increasingly more influential in our culture than contemporary art itself. And I tend to agree with this line of reasoning. And this is just a fun meme that I've seen going around on the internet a lot, but it is quite true that we are now, our ability to see the surface of Mars is becoming so incredibly detailed and realistic. It is quite striking the amount of effort and technology that NASA and other space exploration companies are really putting into installing very high quality cameras on this rover. And now we have even a microphone installed on the Perseverance rover that recorded not long ago actually the wind on the surface of Mars. So you can actually hear the sound of the wind, which is extremely compelling, and really, I think, increases this sense of embodiment that I mentioned earlier. So this line of reasoning led me to develop the project that I am presenting at CYFEST. There is a film, actually the reportage of this project called Kojito in Space, which took me about 5 years. I started it in 2013 and finished it in 2018. And it is really developed from this line of reasoning that I just mentioned. And the project is another experiential performance where the participant transmits their brain activity into space while watching a film in virtual reality of the Earth seen from space. So this is really somehow the very short description of the project. I'm now going to explain exactly what all the different layers in this work. And the title, as you might have already guessed, is from the famous quote of René Descartes, and really aims at linking the project to this ongoing debate about dualism on mind and body for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I think in cosmology, in the current discovery of the cosmos, we are really experiencing this sort of dualistic knowledge. And somehow the project is also referring a little bit to this current philosophical conversation. And Kojito in Space is also an international collaboration. And I've been working together with a filmmaker, with 3 neuroscientists from 3 different international institutions, and also radio astronomers, radio operators, And it has been really wonderful, I think, to bring together these people from different expertise, this different background, and share our languages, our methodologies with each other. It was especially rewarding to see, for example, the radio astronomers and radio operators working with the neuroscientists and sharing partly a very similar language. So both neuroscientists and radio astronomers talk about electrical signals, talk about talk about waves, but in a very different context. And it was really interesting to see actually these languages merge and try to also learn from each other. And so I mentioned earlier this idea, the project is about sending brainwaves into space. And this is when I started doing some research for the project, I discovered that I think the very first artist, author in this case, novelist, to talk about this possibility was Stanisław Lem in the wonderful novel Solaris from 1961. And as you probably know, Lem speaks about Kevin, one of the scientists in the mission that is studying the sentient planet Solaris, eventually transmits the X-ray of his brain activity towards the surface of Solaris. And this episode is also mentioned in the wonderful book by Andrei Tarkovsky, film by Andrei Tarkovsky in 1972. And later in 1977, also Carl Sagan encrypts 1 minute of sound recording in the Golden Record, and the sound recording contains the brain activity recording of science communicator Anne Druyan. Actually, the recording was 1 hour long and it was compressed into 1 minute. However, in 1977, electroencephalogram recordings were at the very still at the beginning of this kind of scientific research. So they were not very accurate. And what you see here is actually a recording that is written on paper by an inked needle. And it is possible that with this kind of devices, actually the main signal was the noise of the facial muscle more than actual brain activity. Nonetheless, I think this was a beautiful idea of Sagan to include the recording of a brain activity in case it ever reaches an extraterrestrial intelligence. They might be able to understand how our brain functions. One of the reasons why I really, I think Solaris was one of the main sources of inspiration for Kojito in space is because like a lot of also Soviet science fiction literature, really questions the limits of rationalism. And I completely agree with this quote from writer Salman Rushdie, who calls Solaris an exploration of the unreliability of reality and the power of the human unconscious, a great examination of the limits of rationalism and, of course, of science. And another layer that was very important in the making of Kojito in space was philosophy of mind. And in particular, I've been looking at Thomas Nagel's and Mind and Cosmos. This book was especially influential in the making of this project. And I found it very interesting how he questions the reliability of the knowledge that we create with our sensory abilities. So we are essentially creatures that are fully adapted to live on Earth, and therefore our cognitive abilities have been developing for us to survive and thrive on this planet. But this also opens up some questions about how reliable is any scientific knowledge that we objectively extract from reality that we only know through a very limited set of perceptive abilities. And therefore, the question is, do we really know what reality is? And even more, do we know what reality in outer space is? Can we trust our knowledge, for example, of astronomy, of cosmology? And so really this adds to this philosophical questioning of the project. And recently also Chelsea Remia, the philosopher I already mentioned, with whom I'm collaborating, she mentioned this thesis that seems to be really, I think, suitable to describe the kind of work I am making with this transmission into space of radio waves and brain activity in this case. So the extended mind thesis was developed by two British philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers, in 1998. And I think this thesis is especially relevant for when we talk about space exploration. So the thesis postulates that the mind is not confined within the skull, is not confined within the body, but it extends also in the environment, more or less close to us, depending on the technology, of course, as well. So essentially, the effect of our thoughts, of our mind, can also extends in our environment, and not only that, but also the environment, including objects, play an active role in shaping our cognitive knowledge. So there is a symbiotic relationship between ourselves and our environment. And as a former contemporary dancer, I couldn't agree more with this statement. As a dancer, you really, any movement extends into the space of the stage, and really, I think, resonates and reaches the audience. And that is a very, I think, clear example of how, the movement generated by the mind really stretches out, becomes a visual arrow and reaches the audience, and also the audience absorb this movement and, of course, conceptualize it. So this movement becomes also part of, the public imaginary. This also opens some questions, ethical questions, about our responsibility when we explore outer space. So we know now that thanks to the internet, for example, our actions can have a worldwide impact. But also thanks to these rovers, the Mars rover, for example, our mind can also shape the surface of another planet, just like we saw in the image of the hole on the surface of Mars. So the question is, do we carry the same ethical responsibility of our actions once we touch remotely another planet? Do we carry our responsibility with us in this kind of extended mind scenario? And lastly, another layer of research for the project was the overview effect, which has been developed by space philosopher Frank White. When I started working on Kojito in space in 2013, I also contacted Frank White, and we started having some conversation about the project, because my plan was to make a film in VR that would convey this overview effect. So the overview effect essentially is described by Frank White as a cognitive shift that takes place once when an astronaut or cosmonaut sees the Earth from space. And in his interviews with cosmonauts and astronauts, Frank White noted that most of these people actually report a shift in their awareness, and report a greater awareness of the interconnectivity of all phenomena on Earth, human phenomena and geographical, climatic, etc. So there is an enhanced understanding of the planet working as a unitary globe, maybe. I don't know if that's the right definition, but it really, these astronauts and cosmonauts realize really very clearly that everything on Earth is interconnected. And this kind of understanding is more difficult to reach for people who had not the possibility to experience this overview effect firsthand. So virtual reality is one way to perhaps communicate this overview effect. But in the case of Kojito in Space, my intention was not to create an outreach platform for the overview effect, but rather to use this concept in a creative way. So I decided to use some experimental footage and showing the Earth seen from space only in a very short clip. But it became more of a journey, an experimental journey through the cosmos. I will talk a little bit more about this later. So the Kojito in Space is an experiential performance. People travel to the telescope, the Dwingeloo telescope, and they sit inside the cabin of the telescope, and the antenna that sits literally over the cabin transmit this brain activity into space in real time. And this is the interior of the cabin. It's very small. Feels really perfect for the project because it really feels like a sort of spacesuit. Once you are inside, it becomes your envelope to travel into space. And here we also conducted our work in progress for about 2 years. We used to meet pretty regularly with neuroscientists and radio astronomers, radio operators. And our aim was to combine these technologies together. So combining trying to convert the electrical signals from 32 electrodes from the EEG cap and combine that with virtual reality and transmit these signals from the 32 channels into space while the person is watching this video in VR. So it took us about 2 years, as I mentioned, and eventually we succeeded. And also the neuroscientists were very pleased that we managed to do this in real time, which was the main concern initially. When they asked me which part of the brain I want to record through electroencephalogram, I said that I was interested in the stream of consciousness, which essentially is this continuous flow of thoughts or perception that we experience in our daily life. And in my opinion, this is the most human signature. And it is the closest we get to try to express how we experience life here on Earth. So this continuous sense of experience, of perception, of thinking, which all humans have, I think is the most universal and most essential signature of our existential experience. And I thought it would be interesting to send that into space as somehow a permanent mark of our subjective life. So the project, it's not what we call like METI. So it's not about messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. It's never been my intention. This project is really about creating a more intimate connection between the the subject and the cosmos. So the person who participates in Kojito really has the opportunity to have a very intimate relationship with the cosmos, and thinking that their mind is traveling into space in real time. And this is really the aim of this performance. However, some people ask me, okay, do you do that to contact other civilizations? And the answer actually is no, because we don't target a particular planet or any celestial object. We keep the antenna still while the Earth rotates, which means that the radio waves are transmitted and spread across the sky, and so they are not going to reach any particular planet. But it is interesting to, of course, speculate what would happen if another civilization received these radio waves containing our brain activity. It is possible that they might understand, that this is also brain activity. But of course, we simply don't know if there is another intelligence out there in the cosmos. These are some images from the work in progress that, as I said, lasted for almost 2 years. We used to meet every few months, and it was great because the group really had the opportunity to get to know each other. And I think every person working in the project brought so much more than just their specialist knowledge. Each of us really brought also our personal experiences, our personal interest about space and a lot of other topics. And I think this richness of exchange really is visible in the final result and really contributed to the quality of the final result. So here you see the actual house where we were staying, which is part of the scientific facilities that are right next to the telescope. And here I quickly want to show some images from the virtual reality film. It's a film of about 10 minutes, and it's a very abstract narrative of the formation of the cosmos, and with the Big Bang, the formation of galaxies, of planets, all realized with footage by filmmaker Sandro Bocci. And he films fluids, and so he has a very kind of I think a unique way of filming these fluids with lighting. And these images are highly evocative without becoming too literal. So only towards the end of the film, you see the curvature of a blue planet. And everyone watching this footage, of course, immediately feels like this is our planet Earth, although there is no particular feature saying, okay, this is planet Earth. What you see is just a blue planet with an atmosphere. But of course, it is such an iconic and familiar sight that we all immediately identify this as planet Earth. And also, again, towards the end of the film, I take the viewer into experiencing the oceanic feeling using a color that is similar to the international blue line. And the oceanic feeling is essentially the perception of being part of a space that is much larger than oneself. This can be understood as a spiritual experience. For some people, it is a religious experience, but in general, it's really the perception to be part of something much, much larger. And I think this really, in my opinion, is the most descriptive way to talk about the overview effect. Is really this understanding that we are part of a much broader cosmos. And finally, towards the end, I show the short footage of the Earth seen from space. It's the first time you see the entire Earth fading away, fading into the back of our retinas, into our mind, becoming a mental picture. And this is almost like saying a goodbye to the Earth and actually reminding us that we only know the entire face of our Earth, of our home planet through images. So our knowledge of the home planet is very limited. And I think this also plays an important role on why we also struggle with our identity as Earthlings, and why we struggle with really understanding our place in the cosmos. Also, we don't know simply also the outlook of our home to start with. For the event I presented in 2018 at the Dwingeloo Radio Telescope, which is actually the event that is shown in the reportage I am presented at CYFEST, Frank White also traveled to the Netherlands to give a talk about the overview effect. And the performance was also preceded by walk in the natural park that surrounds the scientific facilities. And this walk was directed by a planetary scientist and essentially took people into the journey of evolution of the cosmos, of evolution of life on Earth, and our future on Earth, our possible future on our planet. And it's kind of informed by this field of research called big history, which is relatively recent, and which I find very interesting, as it tries to really understand the human evolution within a much larger time frame, which is the time frame of the cosmic evolution. And here are some images, still images also from the film. So in this case, one participant is sending her brainwaves into space. And for this event, I was also the radio operator transmitting the signals. And one of the radio operators working in the project also made a spectrogram, visualized the brain activity recording throughout the performance, and he noticed that there are some clear marks. You can see these vertical lines are the moment when the brain activity has a sudden change, and one of these sudden change happens exactly when we show the image of the Earth seen from space, which I also showed earlier. Right at that moment, most participants show a sudden change of their brain activity, as if their attention becomes suddenly heightened, or as if they have a much stronger response to the image, as it evokes something very, very personal, very, I think, deeply rooted in our imagination. And this leads me also to the project experiment, I would say more than a project so far, that I discussed in the paper for Cosmos and Chaos. And it's called The Metamorphosis of a Periplaneta Americana. And it is an extension of Kojito in space, essentially transmitting into space the neurosignals of beings other than humans. So since the first steps of Kojito in space, I started really questioning if I could also transmit into space the brain activity of other species. And in 2015, I was in Israel for a conference, and I visited the laboratory of a team of neuroethologists. And neuroethologist is a field which studies the neural activity of invertebrates and other animals, actually. And in this particular lab in Tel Aviv, they study locusts and cockroaches. So I asked to have some recording from their research, essentially the neural recording of these insects. So in 2020, finally, I transmitted into space the neural signals of a locust. I had the recording, as I said, from this particular lab in Tel Aviv. And they essentially studied the locomotion of these insects to implement this research in micro robotics. So they also create small robots that move like these insects. Apparently, the movement of these insects is extremely sophisticated and has been really the same for millions of years because it is extremely successful form of locomotion. And so for me, this experiment, which is really continuing, so it is just the first step of a longer project. The aim of this experiment was to really ask almost the impossible question: can we really know what it's like to be a cockroach or a locust? These insects are probably as far as we can imagine from our human experience. So Thomas Nagel asked already in a very renowned paper, what is it like to be a bat? And he concluded that for a human, but probably for any other species, it is impossible to really understand what it is like to be a bat. We can probably speculate, but we will never be able to really have the same bodily experience as a bat. And this question becomes even more extreme once we ask, what is it like to be a cockroach or, a locust? And transmitting these signals into space, it's also a form to ask these questions, but also to have somehow a permanent trace of the existence of these beings in the space medium. Once you send the radio signals into space, they're etched into the space medium forever. They continue traveling until the edge of the known universe. And so they're really a permanent mark in infinite space. So I found this, like a quite poetic way to somehow bring the existence of these very mysterious beings also. Highlight their experience. And what I found really interesting about this experiment, this project, is actually the conversation with the neuroethologist, sorry, and it is in the paper, in the Leonardo paper. We had a really interesting conversation about the possible subjectivity of this cockroach. So we raised also some philosophical questions. And the title, of course, Metamorphosis, is inspired by the novel by Franz Kafka. And this novel actually is quoted by Frans de Waal, who is a renowned ethologist, as the first literary work trying to understand the experience of a being other than human from the human perspective. And in fact, it talks about the main character, Gregor Samsa, who wakes up one morning and he finds himself transformed into a cockroach and suddenly having to change his life completely and live in a room as a cockroach. And I think I particularly love this extremely far-reaching thought experiment. It is so surreal and yet I think poetically really compelling. And in a way, this is what I was trying to achieve with this experiment, trying to really see the perspective of an insect and ask if also this being has any subjective experience. We transmitted actually the neural recording of the cockroach, the experiment I mentioned in the paper, from the Bochum Radio Observatory in Germany, which is a 20-meter satellite dish. Probably you cannot appreciate much from the photo, but it is a very, very large antenna. It is contained within this inflatable dome. And this is actually a photo taken by one of the radio operators while they were transmitting this radio signal into space. This is the end of my talk. I am working on new projects. I I should be able to talk about them in the coming months, but they're really following this line of thought. So I'm continuing my exploration across the fields of neuroscience and radio astronomy. And also I'm working with collaborators from other international research institutions. And all my projects actually are lengthy, so they require years before I eventually complete them. But if you like, if you're interested, you can also check my websites to learn more about the type of work I've been making with these technologies. Thank you.